Hello, everyone. Hello, Dominique. It's been a while since we've recorded one of those conversations. It's always so great to chat with you about all things neuroscience and psychology. And we're looking forward to our chat today.
Excellent. So, my Pavel, it's been a while since we last connected on these sessions, and they've been missed in my life. So, I'm very glad to be doing another one with you.
Excellent. And can you remind our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, I'm Dominique. I'm the founder of Neuro at Work. And what I do is apply neuroscience into the corporate context to help us individually be our best, but also help us be able to navigate organizational change in the best way possible to align with our brains. Because at the end of the day, change lands when it lands with the humans who are meant to adopt whatever it is you're trying to update. So, it's bringing neuroscience into the workplace in a way that really helps unlock the best in any organization.
Yeah, excellent. And as for me, my name is 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗶𝘲𝗀𝘀. I'm a founder and director at a company called Business Purpose. And in my work, I focus on helping organizations, individuals, business leaders to make sure that they can create best possible experiences at work for themselves and for the people they serve, for the people they lead. I do that through a combination of people analytics, one-on-one coaching, and targeted training based on psychological principles. And uh, so, Dominique, something that has prompted us to decide to record this conversation is our latest chat about the challenges around implementing change in organizations. Something you, as a neuroscientist, are very well positioned to offer a unique perspective on. And also, I've mentioned to you that lately I've been doing a lot of work in my capacity as an organizational psychologist, where I would work with different organizations and with business leaders in those organizations on helping them understand what are their personality preferences, what are some of the strengths, some of the development opportunities, the shadows that may be present in their work and how can they address that to make sure that they interact better with their teams and how they better find their own unique working style to really make the most of their strengths while addressing their challenges. And something that you and I thought would be interesting for us to discuss is what's the neuroscience, what's the psychology behind those individual differences, what can we, where does it go wrong when the tensions between personalities, between teams occur, and indeed, what can we advise our listeners who are looking to mitigate that in their work environments?
Absolutely. It's so exciting to be able to connect on this because it's your perspective and your certification in the various insights that you can have into individual personalities, combined with actually a holistic view of what happens in our brains during certain times that impacts our personality. It's going to be really exciting to hear from your perspective all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Dominique, uh, as a neuroscientist, as an expert working with organizations in times of change, uh, I'm sure you've encountered lots of situations where implementing a change initiative was quite challenging because of those tensions, miscommunications that happen, or the perception of miscommunication happening in the team, and that affecting everyone's mood, that affecting the overall workflow, and just people feeling not quite right. Sometimes attributing it to the change itself, sometimes blaming someone, but that's something that can really affect people's experience at work. And I'm wondering, how are you helping organizations to address that, given your expertise as a neuroscientist?
So it's a really interesting conversation because a lot of the past year, and there's quite a few companies who are looking at this before as well, but a lot of the past year has been about bringing our whole self to work. And so the understanding of who the human being is behind the job, behind the role. And when we're thinking about bringing our whole self to work, well, our personalities are an important thing to understand. And so the work that you do is really exciting, really interesting because it helps us on that journey. There are elements of our personality that we are always cognizant and consciously aware of, and there'll be elements that we aren't. So doing the types of insights reports that you look at on the personality side are really interesting because it helps bring out both of those and start the conversation. So as you say, in terms of the things that can be challenging during times of change and day to day in any organization are your communication styles, your preferences, your style of delivery. So are you quite direct? Do you like to go around the point? Do you like to receive information in a certain way? A lot of them are linked to individual preferences and personality preferences, as well as cultural ones overall in the country that you're working in. And one of the things that links to that is not just communication, but your working preference and style as well. So a lot of the types of activities that maybe you love are linked to what is inherently joyful to you, and that will be different for different people. So not only do we have the layer of, do I understand the person who I'm communicating and receiving information from, and am I communicating to them in a way that will resonate? We're also saying, well, day to day, what is it that I'm doing that is really showing my skills to the best, and my creativity, my ultimately the things that can make my personality shine, and is it the same the other side? And so you've got the whole element of the actual communication, but also the doing that's linked to our personality types as well. And for the majority of us, we probably ended up in a career where what we like to do will be matched to our job. That's naturally where we will have got to. But there's always elements within roles where we end up doing things that we don't necessarily love and having to communicate on them as well. And so it's a multi-layered effect. The more you know about yourself and your personality style and your preferences, the more you know about others, the more likely you are to be able to succeed in the things that you do and support those around you to do it the same.
Indeed, Dominic, and I think it really is a question of self-awareness, of having that awareness of one's own strengths, weaknesses, and perhaps how do they interact with other people's strengths, weaknesses, and within the overall system of the company culture within which one operates. And something that's really important here to take into consideration when we talk about measuring personality preferences, understanding that, is that there is a difference between the measurements that look that group people by the type of personality, or that look at personality traits. And that's an important distinction, because sometimes when we talk about measuring personality preferences, people may say, oh, I really don't like the psychometric tests. I really don't like that, because they're sort of putting me into the box, and they're saying I'm either this or that. I should either work like in sales or as an engineer or be a librarian or something. And they really sort of try to put the person into the box, or such is the perception about some of the psychometric tests. But here it's important to remember that some tests do that to an extent. They can still be really powerful and informative and be great catalysts for personal change, for change in teams. But it's important to remember that when talking about personality, we really want to be thinking about a continuum. It's not that a person is either an extrovert or an introvert, either this or that, but there is a certain continuum. A person can be anywhere on that. And what really matters is how do they compare to others in the similar group of perhaps professionals on the same level of experience in the similar cultural environment. And that's really important for us to consider, because yes, it does add more to the complexity of understanding all of that across different dimensions. But at the same time, it really brings forward the point that every single individual is unique. There are similarities between different personalities. There are some of the basic human drives, needs, motivations, something that I believe neuroscience has some amazing insights into. But also we do need to remember that every person is a unique individual, and understanding how to be aware of one's own strengths and challenges and those of others, and how those can interact together, is something that's really important in the modern working environment and in human relationships in general.
Absolutely, because what you learn through these tests, you usually learn them through a work context, but they're equally applicable into your relationships, your personal life as well, because at the end of the day, everything is a connection from human to human. So that really helps outside of work as well as in work. And I think from what you just said, one of the key things to note is that, our brain continues to learn. Neuroplasticity, the process of the brain learning, continues throughout life. So you're never too old to learn. And that means that actually our personalities update along the way as well. So actually, if we keep on redoing the tests, you'll find subtle differences as you go in terms of what your preferences are, what you're enjoying doing at the moment, your style. So you may find that in early careers, there's slightly fewer dominant personalities at that type, but they grow throughout as leadership to have some more of those characteristics. So there's an element of, I know that companies, it can be a time investment and a cost investment, but it's worth refreshing it at various points in your career, because the insight you gain in terms of the wisdom and the learnings that you've had over the period will impact those personality tests, and will show you a snapshot in time of what it is that's most important to you, how you've evolved to communicate differently, to lead differently, to invest in the tasks that you're doing differently. So it's worth updating them as well, and understanding that, you know, when we've got those results, often we can feel, well, this is me, this is it on paper, it's now set in stone. That's not the case. We've always going to evolve over time. And so you'll be surprised that in 5 years' time, your personality test may come out slightly differently, because you've changed and you've evolved over time as well. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, once we've done a personality test, we do tend to put them in a drawer somewhere and go, well, that was interesting. And, you know, knowing about other people, that's interesting, but that's kind of done. And it's not, it's a constant evolution of learning and interacting and updating that process that's really important. I remember at the beginning of my career, Myers-Briggs was a really big thing that everyone was doing. And you'd end up coming out with these Lego blocks of colours, your dominant colour types, and you put them on your desk, and then people would immediately walk over and go, oh, that's a red person who's dominant, or, you know, that's a green or a blue. And again, as you said, there's an element of, it's like diversity and inclusivity training, actually, there's been found to be. It can enforce cognitive biases. So that type of putting, you know, a Lego block on your desk with your dominant colour is helpful to an extent, but it does also reinforce the stereotypes and the pigeonholing that you want to do with other people. So it's really important in terms of once we've got those results, how do we embed them so that we lead towards more inclusivity rather than more individual personality silos that can often be something that comes out of those. And I'd love to, from your perspective, in terms of the type of methodology that you use and what you give to clients at the end of that session, what does it look like in the type of methodology that you use?
Yeah, Dominic, you've brought up such an important example that sometimes, yes, there is that sort of sense, oh, this person is a green or a red. Like, what does it mean? Like, oh, should I be cautious with them? Are they a pushover? What does that really mean? And that's helpful to a point, because it promotes those conversations and helps people to understand where they are. But what we really need to keep in mind is that lots of personality assessments, they are looking at the preferred style. So how does the person behave when they're not trying to be anyone but themselves? What's their natural preference? And that can change. You've mentioned this incredibly important concept of neuroplasticity, having this growth mindset, knowing that one can change if they take the certain steps to change, is incredibly important. And something that I do in my approach when, let's say I work with, I've just done a series of conversations with senior leaders in this large organization. And something that we looked at is their personality preference profile. And I would ask them, how does it sound? How does it feel to you? And they would say, yeah, that's pretty much like me, or this one isn't quite me, I'm a bit surprised. And that's always a conversation. It doesn't mean that what this piece of paper or this PDF that you receive as a report is telling is actually you, but that's a conversation starter. And what we see in that is that sometimes it can say, well, actually, maybe you aren't that comfortable speaking with people or selling. However, that person has achieved a certain degree of mastery and excellence in their job, because that's something that they've been doing for 10, 20 years, and they're still good at it. But would they like to do it like every day for the rest of their career? Maybe not. Or does it come naturally to them? Maybe not. But maybe they have some other strengths that aren't that that highlighted in their current role, but that they can really leverage to create that better angle and to build up on some of their other points that aren't becoming that natural to them. And that's really a question of making sure that everyone feels like their authentic self at work, even though sometimes some job roles require a certain personality, a certain set of behaviors that can be learned or that can come naturally to people. It's always important to know what are my strengths so that I can perhaps double down on them, so that I can reframe in terms of my strengths and previous experiences, some of the experiences that are causing a little bit of cognitive dissonance, that don't feel quite right to me, and really bring my full self without actually feeling that I'm trying to be someone who I'm not at work.
Absolutely, and that is exactly it. You know, we are our most, from a neuroscientific point of view, we are our most productive and engaged when we are ourselves. So when we try to be anyone else, it actually forces an extra layer of cognitive load on the brain. And it's the same when ultimately when we're trying to repress and suppress our emotions. So a lot of roles require a professionalism, a professional front. And absolutely there's a good reason for that. It's, you know, ultimately you've got to have a same level of presentation for people to be able to immediately connect with you. But ultimately, when we are, say, I'm putting on a professional front, but I've had a terrible day, you know, the kids have been screaming all night, I've had a project go AWOL, I've ultimately got a presentation, a sales presentation, and someone's just cancelled. And you're one of those days that you just hope never happen, but sometimes do.
Mhm.
And you're trying to then go into a meeting that's really important with all of that behind you. Yes, you can keep a professional front, but by doing that, those emotions, they're not going away in your brain. Your brain is working harder and using up more mental energy to suppress them, to keep them down.
Mhm.
There's an element of, if we think of that situation, we put it into a more mainstream one of, I'm trying to be something I'm not at work day to day, you're ultimately never going to be your most productive. You're extra using the energy of your brain. And so you're never going to be quite being your best at work. Bringing a different self to work means that you can never really be your best, because your brain just can't actually have the full flow of mental energy to get into that growth mindset, which takes energy for the brain because it's
Mhm.
neuroplastic, or get into that flow, that wonderful flow that we talk about, cognitive flow, where everything just makes sense and you're in the zone and you're working. It's wonderful. If you're not authentic, then that unfortunately is less likely to happen in the workplace from a neuroscientific point of view. So understanding yourself is key, so that you can then create a work environment that works for you, and understanding others so you can support them and help them in that journey to find their flow state as well and their growth mindset. And ultimately, I think you've just gone to the next section as well, saying keeping our cool. Absolutely. During times of change, actually, there's a little bit of there's a couple of things going on in our
Mhm.
brains. The personality profiles we come out with, those beautiful multi-layered things, end up perhaps to a certain extent going out of the window for a set amount of time, because there's a couple of things that impact our personality. One is when we're looking at those personality profiles and the insights and looking at things that we can work on. So what are we naturally adept at and what do we want to work on? Well, when we're doing a lot of stuff, when we're tired, when we're potentially doing more than we've got of mental energy for to do, our brain ends up reverting to the what we do well, and it doesn't have the energy to do the what we're improving. So we go, during times of exhaustion, mental energy, we default in our brain to our biases, our cognitive biases. So not only is our decisions less rational and less complex in being made, not only are we not very creative, we're also our base selves. So whatever we discovered in our personality profiles being our dominant traits, we can only really be those. The rest go out of the window. Our brain doesn't have enough energy to get into the state to be them. And so we've got that layer of what, at the moment, we've had a year of us all being potentially overwhelmed by a lot of different things. Our dominant traits will have seen come out more and more, and our ability to improve ourselves perhaps feels harder to do, because we've got less available mental energy to do it. And then when we add on change and the impact of change on the brain, and this is for everyone and anyone, the difference is how we switch out of it and how quickly. But for all of us, change is processed by the brain as a threat. And during that process, our brain is doing two things. It's really trying to mitigate uncertainty, because at its core, our brain is a survival prediction machine, and it needs good, certain data to be able to accurately predict. So during times of change, it's constantly going, well, what are the better data points? There's so much that's uncertain. I don't know what's happening next. I'm going to keep on trying to get more and more data to be able to be better in my predictions. And that again uses up your mental energy. So your mental energy stores during change are lower. And because the brain doesn't know where you're going and what the best survival route is yet, because it hasn't got the data, it goes into its brain's safe mode, which is fight or flight. And unfortunately, when we're in that, the areas of our brain that are all the amazing whizzy human things of, you know, all of the prefrontal cortex, all the elements that are all about the higher rational thinking, that planning, forward planning, decision making, creative innovation, that gets inhibited. And the areas of our brain that are most active are emotional centers. And so you end up being more emotional and not being able to suppress them in the way that you can. So your professional front basically goes out of the window. You are a lot more prone to stress. You also see things more negatively overall. So things that before wouldn't be negative in your view, your brain is automatically processing. And so when you look at that in terms of personality profile, even the most outgoing, happy, creative person during times of big change could end up finding themselves being negative, overly emotional, short, not being able to be their best at work and do what they normally would do. So it's that element of, yes, we've got our personality insights that are our core state. It's basically our status quo. If we're living our lives normally outside of times of big change or big drains on our energy, this is what our personality profile looks like. But then we have to factor in, well, actually external influences do impact us, and especially when we're low on energy and when big change is happening, we fundamentally revert to some very basic, very unanimous human traits. And that's because we're going to our very basic parts of our brain are coming to the fore in our fight or flight and our cognitive biases. So keeping our cool during times of change can be hard, and it's something for us to be aware of, and it's something for us to forgive ourselves. So I use the term a lot of superhuman, and that to me means being as human as we can be. And it's something that I think is really something we should be bringing to the office more and more, because our value add to the office is our humanity. It's, you know, technology is adding more and more value in terms of efficiency. Well, it's all the bits that are human that are now the really value add. So let's explore and let's be as superhuman as we can. Superhuman does sometimes mean stressed, short, not at our best. But if we can understand, forgive ourselves, and then recognize it in others and forgive them, that's the starting point for a cycle where we can switch our mindset and say, I'm aware of that for myself. I'm aware of that for someone else. What's my toolkit that I can use to feel better, to become my better self again, and to help others? And that's something that, again, neuroscience, that psychology and insights, they really help from that side to help us regain control of it when we do lose our cool, unfortunately, due to other factors.
There's so much amazing, there's so many amazing insights in what you've just said, Dominique. And I think something that really stands out for me is that idea that being superhuman means allowing oneself to be just human at some time, and also giving others the benefit of the doubt, realizing that that's how our personality preferences sort of during the normal times, in times when we feel that we are under some pressure, when we feel that something isn't quite how we'd like it to be, or some of our perhaps the darker or more challenging sides of our personality can come through, and that's perfectly normal. But I think having the awareness of one's strengths and development opportunities, some of the more fragile, weaker personality points, is also important because it gives us a little bit more empathy in dealing with others. It gives us a little bit more of an ability to appreciate that everyone may be going through some challenges in their own mind based on their own styles. Sometimes if an individual is very strongly has a very strong preference for one thing or another, they may be thinking like, oh, why isn't the world like that? Or isn't everyone like that? For example, someone who is really detail oriented might be really frustrated with people who don't give much attention to detail because they're more focused on some of the other aspects of delivery. And those people may think, oh, if only the world were like that, it would be such a better place. But what this statement is actually telling us is that they have a strong preference for that particular type of working. And it needs to be complemented with some of the other styles, because it's important in some jobs, not so much in others. But understanding that, how are different personalities working, and as you've mentioned, Dominique, how what's the sort of default state for the person to which they can return when in times of stress is really important, both to be a bit more self-forgiving in our own mind, but also to be a bit more forgiving, accommodating, uh, when working with others, and indeed to have more to have healthier, more productive relationships with one's colleagues, subordinates, or teams.
Absolutely. It provides that common language. So I think quite a lot of what we both do, we may have slightly different backgrounds, but what we both do in what we deliver to and help clients with is that path to understanding ourselves and each other, and then that path to forgiveness. Because there's quite a few conversations at the moment going on in organizations and teams saying, well, you know what, I know I'm aware that I've displayed some behaviors that maybe aren't the best. I've had really bad days, more so than usual. When those happen in a personal context, you know the route out. You will know if you've basically had a bad day with a friend, you've vented on them, you know from your relationship with them what the path is to say sorry. It might be, you know, going out, treating them to lunch. It might be just sending them a little care packet. It might be just having a chat and saying, look, your turn now, time for you to bed, I've had my moment. But in a situation at the office where we've been short with someone or not being our best self, it's a lot harder to navigate. Well, what is that? What is that step to saying, I'm sorry, and please, could we reset? Could we have a reset button for our relationship? Because actually that what we've just experienced over the past year or whenever the incident was isn't day to day. It's not normal. It's an abnormal situation. So what can we do to get back to that starting position where the slate is essentially wiped clean of the past actions, and we can continue to have a healthy relationship? And it's not easy, you know. Ultimately, in a professional context, you don't necessarily know that other person opposite you, but if you do some personality insights, that's, as you say, the start of the conversation, the common language, understanding yourself, understanding your personality traits, understanding the neuroscience of the brain, what it's gone through. It gives you even the words to start the conversations. And you can say, gosh, you know, ultimately I recognize that in myself. Has anyone else recognized this? And more likely than not, they're going to actually be putting up their hand and going, yes, actually, I've been doing a similar thing. And then you can start that conversation of, well, what would I, if that's happening to me, and so I'm seeing that behavior to me that's possibly negative, this is what would be really great to help unlock that. This is all you need to do to move on from this situation, because we've all had them. And then you can start creating resetting those team boundaries and team working practices that not only have, you know, all the process stuff that you need to set up as well in a new world, but all of the empathy and the humanity of you're essentially my toolkit for you to be able to get the best out of me and for me to be able to respond the best to you. And there's a lot of commonality that comes out of those discussions. So it's not individual toolkits for 10 people in the team. It's a lot of commonality with a few tweaks that I've added on of, you know, if you've had a bad day with me, give me a bit of space because I'm a bit more of an introvert. I'm a bit more detail oriented. I would just need to process, versus someone else who might be like, just get straight on the phone, just ping an email, sorry, and that's what you need. Like, that's fine. That will get it over with. We'll clear the air that way. It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Those, you know, those personality types are also good pathways to learning how to get over the trickiest situations that we've all been living through, and helping to press the reset button on the emotional side of working together.
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned the importance of having shared language. I think that's a really important one, because sometimes it can happen that people don't talk about conflict, people don't talk about some of the challenges, and that results in miscommunication just because they don't know the words to describe their emotions, to describe what they may be feeling in the moment, or what is it about perhaps the other person's approach or their perceptions of other person's approach that's making them feel in a particular way. And thanks to the psychometric testing, thanks to understanding more about one's own personality preferences, we can make sure that we have that language we can use in our conversations with others. And if someone else has had the same experience, it allows people to have deeper, more meaningful conversations, or start from a deeper point in their conversation early on, to make, because they both know that they share that understanding, they share that they've all taken a few steps in reaching their personal awareness, and even though they are quite different as individuals, they do know how to talk about it, and they do give each other the benefit of the doubt, because They know that there is no magic behind negative emotions that we may be experiencing. There is no magic behind feeling in a particular way, or being triggered, being annoyed by someone in a particular situation. What's actually happening is that there may be a mismatch in communication, in preferences for communication, and in those personality preferences in different individuals.
Absolutely. And it's also important. All of that creates a high performing team. So awareness of each other is kind of the missing link. If your team isn't necessarily performing at the moment in the way that you'd love them to be, this is a good step. This usually is the building block to then understand, well, what are the rest of the things that might be good to tweak to keep and make that team high performing. And just one point from the neuroscience point, that commonality of language. Once you name an emotion that you're feeling, your brain is then able to process it better. It then takes it and says, right, this is what's going on in whirring around. This is what the chemical state is. I'm now going to objectively look at it and see what I can do with it. So it's that naming the emotion is the first step to dealing with it. It's the first step to moving beyond it. So obviously, if you're naming a happy emotion, it's great, you want to stay in that. But if it's a negative emotion, by saying, this is me stressed, okay, right, this is it. The brain has understood what stress is. It's there. Now what can I do to move beyond it? And it holds it apart in a sort of space that lets you move beyond rather than being consumed by the emotion.
Yeah, indeed. And Dominic, so we've had a few conversations about this approach that you have for starting those conversations about people's personal preferences. And I've always thought that it's a great idea. Remind me if that's right. You call it the ideal workday, an ideal weekday, and you really just, if I remember correctly, you really just help individuals to make sure that they structure their day and their week at work so that they have less of the sort of the stressors, or are more or better prepared to deal with stressors because they have more of the headspace, because they're working in the way that's most meaningful for them and are aware of others' perspectives and others' preferences. Can you tell us a bit about that, and how are you, I guess, making those interventions possible in organizations, and how have they helped some of those you worked with?
Absolutely. Thank you, Pavel. It's a really lovely thing to do, because you see the immediate impact. It's a lot of things with change take time to come together and to see the impact that you're making, but these are immediate, these workshops and approaches. The first is to look at the individual level. So absolutely, it's how do you create and structure your ideal working day? And it's based on how does the brain actually work? What does good look like and feel like? So when you're productive and positive, what's the brain state? And what does the functioning of the brain mean, so that certain tasks, certain ways of living help promote the positive, and some of them run down and promote the negative. So then you can start to structure your working day to promote the positive and to limit the negative overall. So you end up with more mental energy better applied during a day. And then what we do after we've done that first discovery session of the individual awareness of, okay, this is what I like to do, this is what I'm doing at the moment, this is what I should do more of to be better and more productive. You go into the team element, and that's where we bring in all of the ideas of the insights of communication preferences, the idea of, well, what is your ideal working day? How does that differ to mine? And you start to co-create team working practices that are based on the ideal scenario as a group. So ultimately, it's rare that something will work perfectly for everyone, because you'll all have different preferences, but you agree and you emotionally attach to the ideal way of working that takes into account most positives possible. And so you look at things like team meetings, you look at things, well, how do you interact with your internal clients, or in fact customers if you're in a customer facing role? How do you make sure that you get the best out of your diary and out of your interactions with your team and other people outside of your team, so that you are promoting in them as well the best in them? And so through that, you get to move beyond what we've been living so far, which is kind of a survival instinct, and you get to start living and being your best at work. And of course, a lot of what you learn in those workshops you take to your family life as well. So if you can end your day on a positive and productive note, where you've got more energy than you would ordinarily, then of course that's going to filter out into your personal life. You're going to be a better self when you turn off your computer. The people around you are going to benefit as well. And it might be that you structure your weekend slightly differently, again, to make up with what works for you as an individual and for your family and friends around you. So it's basically a series of workshops that immediately have impact and that you can build on, and that also support, if your organisation is going through a lot of change, it supports wider organisational change and resilience. So it helps you land those better, and it helps people feel more empowered to deal with those and to be their best during that process. But there is the insights and the personality profiles. Those are really great and really key as well in that process, because it just helps you understand your emotional needs and your process needs, as well as the brain's overall functioning.
Yeah, sounds like such a great program, Dominique. And what you say there about not just designing one's own approach, but making sure that it works as seamlessly as possible with that of one's team members is really important. And something you've mentioned there about using the personality preference profiles is also great, because, and that's something that we've mentioned with you during our conversation today at several points, we want to make sure that there is the individual awareness of one's strengths and development opportunities, potential challenges, but also knowing how do they interact with others, to avoid those clashes in personality when they aren't productive. Sometimes they are productive. They can generate new ideas. Sometimes conflict can be good, but sometimes it can also be really draining for teams and really distract people. So having that first of awareness of oneself, making sure that there's a shared language between teams to be having those conversations that they can achieve through the sort of work that I've been doing in the personality preference, the psychology of communication space, but then also making sure that there is this systemic element of how can we scale that to our team, to our department, to our organization, while making sure that both the operation side of things, but also the very basic neuroscience side of things is taken into consideration. I think we're onto something. I think that's something that's really important for the organizations in the future, for teams, individuals in the future, to enjoy their work more, to be more productive without compromising their well-being.
Absolutely. And I think that is what the new normal is going towards. There's a lot of us talking about the location, about the physicality of the process, but there's things that we're not going to compromise on anymore in this new workplace. We've had a glimpse of things being able to be better, things being able to be changed, and that's really important. As soon as you can see that things can be changed, and for us they all happened pretty much overnight, then you can see the opportunities for actually creating something that works for you. And from an organization's point of view, of course, if your employees are feeling fulfilled, engaged, then they're going to be more productive. If you've got them in their best understanding and empathetic mindsets, then they are also going to be better, high-performing teams. So it makes sense from a business investment point of view, but also from an individual point of view. I think there's been a while where business and individuals have been sort of moving in slightly divergent directions. And actually, there's one good thing that's come out of the past year, is the fact we are starting to marry the two again and be able to have organisations that are symbiotically supporting and helping their employees to be better, and vice versa.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm a strong believer that we need, for that to happen, we need to take into consideration the neuroscience, the psychology side of things that you and I focus on, but also some of the other elements that, again, we use in our work, such as in your case, knowing how to work with operations, with the change side of things, and in my case, knowing how to work with analytics, with data, to measure effectively what we're changing, so that our neuroscientific, our behavioral science, psychological interventions can really make a difference for organization in the longer term, connect with individuals on that basic human level of understanding that can come intuitively to us once we start talking about it, and then making sure that it brings that lasting change to organizational cultures and the society as a whole.
Absolutely, Pavel. So that's a wonderful note to conclude on as well. You've summed it up fantastically well. It's the change that we're looking to bring. It's multidimensional. It's going to help everyone overall and create a more tolerant and inclusive society.
Indeed, and Dominic, always such a pleasure to be speaking with you about this intersection of neuroscience, psychology, change, organizational culture. How can our listeners get in touch with you and find out more about your work?
Absolutely. So there's lots of the usual channels. So I've got a website where you can contact me. There's an email address as well. There's also Instagram where I often share insights and thoughts into managing one's own energy levels on productivity and positivity, but also at the organizational level. So if you're thinking of going through changes on social media and LinkedIn, there are snippets of tips that you can use and take straight away and go for it. So yes, please do get in contact either through email, either through my website, or feel free to follow some of the social media if you just want to have a look and receive some tips.
Yeah,
And how
thank
about
you.
you? So it's the same thing for you, right?
Yeah, I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Uh, you can look up my name. It's a bit of a tough one to spell, but always happy to connect through my website, through my email. It's businesspurposecoaching.com. And if you'd like to listen to more conversations with Dominique or some other wonderful people in the world of coaching, analytics, HR operations, change, organizational development, all sorts of conversations. Check out YouTube and my channel name, Business Purpose. So that's YouTube channel Business Purpose. And thank you everyone for listening. And Dominique, thanks so much for joining me today.
As always, it's been a pleasure, Pavel. Thank you so much for the time to chat away on these topics.
Thank you.